Oh, hello there, and welcome to Phil Talking D20. That's right, it's been so long since I've last spoken to you that I've grown a massive dwarven beard that's gone all grey, and a whole new version of Pathfinder 2 has come out. That's right, it's been like 9 years. It's not quite that long, and we're going to talk about why pretty quickly because we've had a revision of Pathfinder 2. Why? This is a really big question, and it's bloody important. Wizards of the Coast tried to do a Sauron, and they tried to use the One Ring being the OGL gaming license, to bind them all in the darkness and steal everybody's money. I mean, it must have been terrifying for Paizo staring down the barrel of that situation where they could just suddenly find themselves handing money over that they'd rightly earned themselves, hand over fist, to Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro because they thought they could just change a rule in a legal document and completely screw loads and loads and loads of great, talented, independent content creators and just steal all their money. So Pathfinder 2R, as I'm now calling it, the remaster, has come from a pretty harrowing place. But Paizo, in fairness, has been pretty monumental in their efforts to get this turned around in the time they've turned it around in, but also in creating the Orc license, which is a counter to the OGL. Um, in the form of Frodo throwing the One Ring in the volcano and giving a free and in perpetuity license to the gaming community so that people can create content without the fear of Sauron coming and stealing all their cash, which is pretty damn impressive. So if you haven't been that informed or paid that much attention to the harrowing events that have taken place for many talented and capable people, that's why we've suddenly had this GM core, player core to our revision created. Paizo had no choice but to strip out and gut OGL content from Pathfinder 2. Now, there wasn't oodles of it, but there was enough for it to be a problem. So they've done the right thing. They've made changes. I want to talk about GM Core 2, but there's a few things that I have to kind of preface to this before we get to the nitty gritty of that. So bear with me. We're going to get there. Now, effectively, what they've done is they've created Player Core 1, GM Core 1, a book for players, a book for games masters. They've taken and stripped out a lot of content from existing books, the core book, the advanced players guide, the games mastery guide, etc., and moved a lot of it around, put it into these books. It's a very simple, I suppose, simplified explanation of what they've done, but it was important. Now, the reality of this is some very simple examples. Mithril. Mithril is now called Dawnsilver. It does what Mithril did mechanically in the game. It's just got a different name. Caveat emptor, they're free of OGL binding on that particular topic. Spells. Many have been renamed. That's given them an opportunity to revise them, make them cool, make them unique, make them independent. They have looked at the way that people have played Pathfinder 2 and made a lot of changes to kind of bring it in line with the community. We've almost had another 18 months of playtesting, which is not a bad thing. A very simple example of this, the cleric has a war priest element to it. It's a class kind of arc, if you like, that you take. And they have put into that the ability to get heavy armor. A lot of people found a way to get heavy armor into the cleric because they were playing a war priest. They could have light and medium armor, and they were like, yeah, but I want heavy armor because it doesn't affect my spell casting. How can I go about circumventing the rules to get it? Here's a way I can do it. Jobbed. So they've just gone, hey, people are doing this anyway. We've put it in as a class feat. Bob's your uncle. Another simple example of changes that they've made to revise and, I suppose, tweak up this revision of Pathfinder 2. So those are a couple of very simple examples of some changes that have happened. There's lots more changes than that. But I'm not the kind of channel that wants to sit and just read feats endlessly and give you every single minute kind of change to the system, because in a way it's a spoiler, but also it's taking away from your ability to sit and read the book, which you should do because it's your job. If you've bought a book, you should read it. Bad news. But I do want to talk about a particularly big talking point, which is the new death and dying rules. And I want to talk about them in concepts alongside GM Core 1, because GM Core 1 has some pretty fundamental advice to solve this theoretical problem. At the moment, a lot of people are panicking. There's a lot of negativity, there's a lot of worry, there's a lot of alarm about how savage the dying rules are on their own. And they're right in that. There's a lot of concern because, and I'll explain why now. The general consideration in the original Pathfinder 2e was you would hit 0 hit points and gain the dying condition and the wounded condition. And you would kind of fob the wounded condition off for later. And what would happen is you would make a death or dying save. If you failed it, you would move down the track to dying 2. If you took damage, you would move down the track to dying 3 if it was in the same round. But that was generally considered how you would be creeping down the dying condition until you reach dying 4, where you'd be dead. And generally, as a rule of thumb, that meant that you probably had 2 or maybe 3 rounds for someone to get to you, even if things weren't going brilliantly for you. So you would still be unconscious, you would still be dying, but it wouldn't be that you were in absolutely dire trouble immediately. Now, they've clarified it. So what happens now? You hit 0 hit points and you gain the dying condition 1 and the wounded condition 1. You make a dying save on your next round, and if you fail it, you move to dying 2. And you add your wounded value of 1, so you become dying 3. So you are on the brink of death immediately. Which means next round, if you fail your dying save, you're dead. If you take damage next round, you're dead. If you make your save, you would creep up 1, but then if you took damage, you would move down 1 and re-add your wounded condition of 1 and be dead. It's a lot quicker, isn't it? And it's pretty savage. I would go as far as saying it's kind of Dark Souls-esque in the way that you can very easily die in the new rules. There's no argument about that. There's no grey area about that. If you just look at those rules alone, it's correct. Now, Dwarf as an ancestry has some really cool, unique thematic feats within it that if you combine with toughness and die hard, basically means you can get to a point kind of early mid levels where your dying saves are a 6 plus your dying condition. So dwarves can be incredibly resilient and resistant to the rules of the new dying rules. Also, Pathfinder 2 has a lot of options for healing. There's lots of spells. There's the heal spell, a simple, obvious example that has a ranged version. Bob's your uncle. Stabilised. There is the treat injury, obviously medicine skill that you can use to stabilise someone. There are tools, a lot of tools within Pathfinder 2 that also enable you to counter it, if you like, mechanically as players at the table. But it's still incredibly dangerous. However, we're not looking at a solution to these rules. A lot of people are simply talking about these rules abjectly in their own unique form without looking where there might be solutions. It's exciting to talk about this. It's dramatic. Lots of people are kind of, oh, it's terrible. But they're not giving you solutions. And that's what I'm here for, with the power of GM Core 1. Now, I got my Player Core 1 and my GM Core 1 given to me by Paizo to review. Thank you very much, Paizo. I very much appreciate that. It means you love me and I love you. And I've done this before in previous videos, I think sometimes as a community, we think we know how to play the game and we miss things. Very early on, I was saying, when people were saying that this game is quite hard, because it is, Pathfinder 2 is quite a hard game. You only have to look at the published adventure paths. I'm kind of not surprised by these new revised death and dying rules because lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of people say that the adventure arcs are pretty damn tough. And I've looked at some of them and I've looked at their encounters and I've gone, wow, those are pretty spicy encounters for a party of that level. And then there's a lot of people that go, oh, we were in this encounter in this particular adventure path and my whole party TPK'd. I'm going to have a strop about it. Rightly so, because it's frustrating for a story to end in a big bloody mess. But sometimes it happens. And I was quite an early kind of trumpeter of the need for teamwork and the meta of Pathfinder 2 being more about being prepared as a player and being prepared as a party and looking at things you can do together to synergize things. Like I made a big deal about the fighter being the best debuffer in the game. A lot of people look at a fighter and go, damage dealer. And in a lot of games, 100%, you're completely correct. There's also the joke about, which is more a D&D joke, about the human fighter being the most boring character you can play, and I disagree with that. I think that's unfair, especially in Pathfinder 2, because in Pathfinder 2, you're an expert in martial combat. Now, bear with me, I am still talking about death and dying, but I want to kind of give you an idea of, when we get to that, why I've come to this conclusion. The fighter can disarm better than everybody else because he hits better. And the hitty bit, the rolly bit, the exciting clicky clacky of the plastic dice god, is why many people are addicted to these games. We love them because our moment of dunk is life and death, is drama, is excitement, is escaping the dirge of life to escape into a world of fantasy and adventure, and the clicky clacky plastic dice gods give us a good buzz when it lands on that natural 20 and shit gets real, or it lands on a natural 1 and you know something's gone horribly, horribly, horribly wrong and you're just waiting for the GM to tell you how bad it is, and the GM goes whoa, and it's all gone completely peak tong. But be that as it may, I was quite quick to say, hang on a minute, guys, what about the consideration that this is a way that we should be structuring our games when we're sitting at the table as players? If you're incredibly good at hitting because you're an expert with martial weapons, that means you're statistically more likely to be able to trip someone, to be able to disarm someone, to be able to reposition someone, so that the weaker, like, if you like, combatants that rely on things like maybe a rogue sneak attack is more likely to be triggered because I've been able to use my powerful athletics and my higher statistical chances of getting a good roll to reposition someone as the fighter, so that I'm now forcing someone into flanking, so that the rogue is more likely to hit because the opponent is now at -2 to them. Or with the disarm trait, they're now taking a penalty on their attack roll. So if they've moved up to my squishy friend the wizard, that they're now less likely to hit the wizard because I've debuffed them as the fighter. I'm not focusing on primary damage, I'm buffing and debuffing. Now, I'm not saying that's the only way to play the fighter. Not at all. The fighter is a very versatile, capable, high damage, also buff, debuff kind of player in their own right, in a very different way than perhaps a lot of people expect. But encounters is another talking point. I've ran encounters that on paper are moderate, but because of a resistance or a particular thing that a monster has meant that the party weren't as prepared to fight it, and so it was actually harder than they and I anticipated. A simple example of that was I put them against it was effectively a skeletal, like undead drake. And on paper it was moderate, but it had a resistance to, I think it was from memory, piercing And a couple of the party members, their big damage was piercing damage, and so they were getting 5 taken off their damage rolls every time. And so that fight became a bit more dramatic and a bit tenser than everybody expected, just because of a simple little thing of a resistance. Now, to kind of caveat back to the start and GM Core 1 and why the death and dying rules as they stand now, where they are far more likely to see players simply die, is an important tool for you to have and use. In GM Core 1, it talks in detail about hero points. And there is a piece of advice that is carried over from the original core book and also from the Games Master Guide, where they're talking about you should issue a hero point roughly every hour of play, unless you are in a particularly high stakes or dangerous adventure arc where you should consider dishing out a hero point every half an hour. Based on these new death and dying rules, as they are, you should be dishing out a hero point as a GM every half an hour of play. Now, a lot of people get hung up on hero points. They're not very popular in D&D 5th edition. I think with everything that goes on as a GM and as players at a table, there's already a lot of dice to juggle. You're already doing a lot of different things. You're working out what feats do, you're working out what spells do, you're working out what rules might apply in a particular situation. You're going, spinning all these plates. I've forgotten about hero points. But they're baked in. They're a core part of this game. And if they're a mechanic that's built into this game, they enable you to stabilize. So a player, when they go 0, wounded 1, dying 1, and they are in that situation where they've got a dice in their hand, and if they fail it, they're dying pretty much straight away at dying 3, which means next round, anything goes wrong, dead. Proper, actual dead. Their character's gone from the story. It's over in 1 round. They're on literally death's door. So fast now. Unless they've got a hero point, at which point they can stabilize. That's it. Now, that's not the only issue with hero points here, and we're going to keep talking and referencing GM Core 1 because this is a very important mechanic that a lot of people I don't think are considering in light of the new dying rules. I've had chats with people online and I've seen this kind of come up time and time again, this worry that for a lot of people in organised play where they don't have GM fiat to say, I'm going to use the old death and dying rules because they're in organised play, they're at tournaments, they're live events where the rules are being run as written, they're very concerned that they're going to see loads and loads and loads of TPKs and loads and loads and loads of player death. But the GM should be issuing hero points. It even is baked into the XP system of the game. So again, in GM Core, when we're talking about how we dish out XP, we have combat encounters. They give us mechanical XP when we defeat them, either by bypassing them because we're smart and we're crafty and we don't fight the thing directly, but we bypass it in an intelligent and smart way. You still get the XP. If you confront that and fight it and defeat it, XP. Brilliant. But you also have minor and moderate and major achievements, which are about the narrative of the game. A simple example of this is part of their quest that they're currently on and involved in is sieging and taking an enemy castle. That is something they have to achieve. It is an achievement. They will have the XP generated from the fights and the kind of the battles that will take place in that process of doing it, but they'll also be eligible to maybe get 30 XP for a moderate achievement for securing the gatehouse. A moderate and a major achievement in the game also issue a hero point. Now, another key point to consider and remember is if your characters assault and climb a ladder and fight their way onto the walls and face the threat of certain death, fighting on the battlements, clamber down and open the gates to allow more warriors in, that's pretty heroic. So again, outside of the achievement system of opening the gate and taking the outer bailey of the keep being a moderate achievement, that was also pretty heroic. And you should issue hero points for heroic things. So you can already see how, in the mechanics of the game, based on the actual rules, there is a pretty statistically high chance that you will be regularly issuing hero points, which means that when they get dropped to zero, they will have a good chance of not having to panic about making a death save because they can choose to spend a hero point to stabilize. Now, moving away from that and trying to make hero points more interesting, one of the systems that they have in the GM core is advice on narrative points, story points, and they say you can reflave them as you see fit. And these are very similar to, and a good example of these to kind of give you kind of context from another game, which is always fun and interesting to do, are the flashback system from Blades in the Dark, which enables you to be, and we'll use the example of robbing a bank. The party of brigands are charged with robbing a bank by their crime boss. In the process of robbing the bank, they encounter a night watchman who's guarding the vault. They can use, if they haven't already done so, one of their flashbacks that they're assigned by the game to have perhaps the party's kind of face, kind of, smooth talker, having found out who the night watchman is by going and doing some chatting in the bank early in the day, and then going to visit the night watchman at his home and saying to him, hey, we'll cut you in on 20% of the vault's takings when we rob it tonight if you help us. And then that mechanic enables you to bypass that obstacle in a new and interesting way that means you're more likely to succeed. Now, there's nothing stopping at some point later down the line a GM going, oh, well, now that you've done all of this and you're in the final throes of completing the heist, that perhaps the night watchman says, well, actually, I've got my finger on the alarm button. I want 30% now because I'm not happy with the 20% stake. And the drama's back, the tension's back, it's there. So these tools, the flashback system as an example, and the narrative points or the the story points or the whatever you want to call them, fate points. I mean, there was a system in the Lord of the Rings tabletop game made by GW that characters had fate. And if they were a powerful hero that went all the way through the movies, they had a lot of fate, which enabled them to resist simply being killed when they got dropped down wounds. Whereas characters who did fundamentally die quite early, like Boromir, although they had a lot of capability and very, very powerful combatants in their own right, they were still more vulnerable to being killed because they had less fate. Does that make sense? Good. Narrative points in the GM core. They enable you to, as a player, poke the story in a direction. Obviously, there's a bit of back and forth GM fiat. You can't just be like, and our party killed the dragon, because that ain't how the game works. But it could be that you're in a situation where, much like in that bank vault, you've suddenly come across an interesting conundrum, and you can use a fate or perhaps maybe be so bold, a hero point, because you can simply take the narrative point idea, roll it into hero points and give hero points new meaning in your game to make that currency valuable. Because this is the key, I think. The Death and the Dying rules, the new ones, very, very scary, very, very killy, very, very arg. Hero points are there and are often overlooked by groups. So how are we going to make this system that mechanically, clearly, very much counters the immediate threat of the Death and Dying rules? It's by making hero points more interesting, more rewarding, more flavourful to your particular game, your world, your adventure arc. Perhaps you could use hero points as a way for essentially investing in the world. I spend a hero point to have a castle built in this particular region to support the party and our achievements thus far in our campaign in the Badlands. Cool, wicked, brilliant. If that's getting them spending hero points, excellent, go for it. if the narrative token advice that they have in GM Core 1 excites you, put that in. Incentivize the players and yourself as the GM to use hero points more, because we're supposed to be using them more simply based on the rules in the book. And very much now, I think it's important to try and counter the very scary prospect of people dying super quick. Now, a hero point doesn't stop damage pushing you down the wounded, dying condition slide of doom, but it's buying time and insulating against a bad roll, really making things go horribly wrong very, very quickly. And I think that's why it's important sometimes to take a step back when we've got Mr. Bad News and look at why that's a thing in context to other systems of the game, which again goes back to where I started in this video with things like teamwork, obviously weaknesses. Recall knowledge is another talking point where people are being obtuse and argumentative needlessly, because again, the recall knowledge system is very clear and very simple in its simple kind of roll, succeed, ask a question, get an answer. Whereas some people seem to be suggesting that you ask a question and then the GM tells you that they like cheese and that's the end of it, and you don't get any useful information. And then you're TPK'd because you didn't have the right weapon type damage or didn't use the right spells to bypass resistance, etc., etc. That's almost a whole other talking point. Not one I want to get into at this stage in the video. But GM Core 1, as you can see, from taking that one simple lock-in of rules for a games master and comparing them to the death and dying rules that obviously obliquely apply to the players in your game, it's not necessarily the end of the world that these new death and dying rules are scary. Like I said, I'm not surprised that they're scary, and even the original rules, people were pretty blasé about them until they were dying too and realised that something goes wrong next round and they take damage and then they're just dead. Like, it was still quite possible to die. It's now very, very possible for your player character to be killed, but hero points will insulate you to an extent, as long as we use them as GMs. Now, to talk about another part of GM Core 1, now that I've had that big monologue about how it helps you as a book understand the death and dying rules, and hopefully really understand how they're countered in the system's mechanics. I want to talk about the subsystems that they've included from the Games Mastery Guide that they released for Pathfinder 2, because that's another big chunk of good, juicy content in GM Core 1. These are things like the reputation system, the leadership system, the chase system. These are obviously just 3 examples from a number of other systems they've included in this book. But they're really juicy, cool things that give you subsystems that really add some depth to your game. Now, reputation as a system is very straightforward. It's a way of tracking your, if you like, popularity or fame or general view of, say, critical NPCs or organizations within the world that you're playing in. So a lot of video games have these kind of concepts in them baked in. So you're probably already familiar with this idea. A good example of this is I play a lot of space games. If you help the space police against the space pirates, your standing with the space police goes up and your standing with the space pirates goes down. And that's effectively what the reputation system enables you to very easily track. If you do some good things for a particular group in the world, they are more inclined to help you. They might have a reduction in DCs to persuade, so that it's easier for you to say, hey, look, I could really do with some extra, knights to help us on this particular campaign that we're going on. Or it may be that it's like, look, I need somewhere to stay because there's 5 foot of snow and there's a blizzard, and if I'm forced to stay outside, I'll die. and I need shelter in this particular kind of facility that this organisation runs, you're more likely to be allowed in to spend a night and not die of the cold. Again, quick caveat emptor here. In the GM core, we have some brilliant advice on environmentals. Will extreme cold kill your character in Pathfinder 2? Yes, because you have in extreme cold a guide on how much damage you will take from the environment just being in it. Fortitude saves and then constant damage, and it ranges, so it's like every hour you will take 2d6, or every half an hour you will take 8d6, whatever it might be. If you're caught in a forest fire, what might that be like? Utterly awful. I think we've all seen the news recently. It's the most terrifying thing I think we've all seen. Those huge columns of smoke and those great sweeping arcs of fire destroying people's homes and livelihoods. It's just absolutely terrifying. You can put that in your game. It's in the world. These things happen. It's a terrible place. But there's really solid mechanics for all these kind of things. Now, they've always been there. I'm not saying that this is new content, but I'm just saying these are the kinds of solid, great mechanical buildings that you've got in GM Core 1. Other great examples of this: traps, conditions, poisons, diseases. They've gone to town on some of these. Definitely been some really nice juicy changes in GM Core 1 for afflictions and diseases and plagues and curses, really chuffing you up as a player. One of my favourite ones was basically like the way they talked about how an area of like land or a tomb can have a curse on it that can just creep damage into your character, and the way that you can take these kind of afflictions and curses and apply them to perhaps a necromancer's lair. So simply going into the stronghold of the really powerful evil kind of end of campaign necromancer, simply opening his front door and being like, hello, we're just popping in to have a big fight with you, and him being like, oh, I'm up in my super evil lair at the top of the tower, pop on up and we'll have a big old shindig fight and see who wins and who loses. First one to die is obviously the loser. If it's you, I resurrect you and put you in my army. And you being like, okay, cool, well, we've got some encounters on the way up through your tower, but we'll get to you. And then being like, well, it's fine, I'm just having a cup of tea with Charlie. And then you going in and going, oh, we're going to room 1, and the DM being like, wicked, it's cursed. You're taking curse damage. You've got to resist the effects of the curse of this evil building. And then being like, but we've also got to fight the 2 giant undead skeletons. And you being like, yeah, but you're heroes, aren't you? This is why you're getting hero points on a regular basis, because you're facing this kind of crazy madness. GM Core 1, it gives you these terrifying, in some cases, tools to get stuff done, namely killing the party, but also rewarding the party. That's your job. I always think as a GM, if you're right-handed, it's this way around. If you're left-handed, it's the other way around. But generally, you should, in my case, I'm right-handed, you should give to your party with your right hand and take with your left hand. And what I mean by that ethos is you should always just try and outweigh what you're giving from what you're taking. So because if you just really went hard on curses and afflictions, all that kind of other stuff, and refuse to use hero points because you think they're silly and rubbish, you will literally just TPK all the time. And if you like doing that to your players, you're probably a bit of a, well, unpleasant word. Unless your players really enjoy that because they smash their faces against brick walls playing Dark Souls and going, oh, I died 72 times defeating that boss. It was so rewarding. Yeah, you can keep that. But this game, in its current state, is doing a lot of really, really good stuff. GM Core 1, it will help you kill your party. No, it will help you run your games as a games master. If you've got the Games Mastery Guide, if you've got the original core rulebook, is it absolutely critical? No. If you're a new player, obviously yes. But don't sleep on it. It's a really critical tool to understanding what counters what. And that's death and dying in Pathfinder 2e. It's countered by hero points and some shenanigans. Enjoy it, get stuck in. I will be back. I'll be back Obviously not after this commercial break, but I will be doing another video where I talk more about Player Core 1 that everyone's going bananas about, and reviewing every single feat and talking about every single talking point they can possibly imagine. Whereas I am more inclined to say maybe you should read it for yourself and give you a guide. And I have been your guide, Phil Talking D20. Salute, and I will see you on the flip side. Peace.